Dan McTeague of Canadians for Affordable Energy. Hi, Dan. How you doing?
I'm doing fine, Cory. Good to talk to you, and thanks for having me here.
Oh, I'm always glad to have you on. I just like that reminder as we're getting a little grayer and longer in tooth. But there was a time when Liberal members of Parliament were something that could be considered sane, and you were of that era. And maybe we could get back to a balanced Parliament again one day. I would still vote Conservative, but perhaps I could respect those Liberals over there again.
And we could respect Conservatives on the other side. I think those days will come back, but it requires a lot of people to get back to basics and reality and move away from the utopian fantasies we've been entertaining, especially here in Eastern Canada.
Yeah, well, I love you calling them out on social media, on X and other areas as well. You say it like it is. But your specialty is energy issues. And boy, there's a lot of them going on. I just came back from about 25 days down stateside. I was traveling through Idaho, Arizona, Texas, New Mexico, quite a bit around. And just to tie this in up here, something that's interesting, maybe you could help a little with. Down there, I saw the most, in the energy producing states, I saw the most windmills, I saw the most solar farms. Just like when I'm in Alberta, I see the most windmills and solar farms, even though there's the abundance of natural resources. Yet both Texas and Alberta have been stricken by energy shortages when push comes to shove. How is it that these jurisdictions are the ones that seem to be the most vulnerable when it comes to needed electricity and power when they should be the least?
Well, it's ironic that you have a country in a region of the world, both Texas and the United States, which are the prowess, the flagships of energy reliability and energy development, resource and output and exports. And yet both have found themselves over the years, Alberta very recently last month, Texas 2-3 years ago, when putting all your eggs in one renewable basket doesn't necessarily cut the mustard when you put these things to the test. And they were tested. In Alberta's case, had it not been for the ability for the province to secure natural gas and to a lesser extent coal, a good number of people would have been adversely affected, minus 40 or more degree temperatures. In the United States, we do know that there were injuries and potentially fatalities in Texas, but those areas that were served by natural gas backups, where wind power was simply not available, not reliable, we saw that they were far more successful in certain areas. And it's become very clear through analysis in the Texas case. I think it was Texas Railroad Commission at the time said, without natural gas backup, the idea of windmills are fanciful and dangerous. And I think that's where we're leading today, because I think a lot of the policies promoted by governments on both sides of the border are leading us to really what I consider the net zero collision course, in which reality is going to finally hit Canadians and Americans over the head, that these things are not ready for prime time.
Well, and it does get dangerous and frustrating. I watched some of the conversation while Alberta was getting hit so hard. That was just as I was kind of heading down south. And, we're worried when it's minus 30 and you get a power failure. I mean, people could be terribly, terribly harmed. But what I'm hearing from the advocates is saying this is an indication on why we need more renewables, because we need to bring more power into the grid. Like they double down. They won't face the reality that we still need this conventional energy base.
Well, look, you have no wind and it's freezing outside. You can have one windmill or 10 million windmills. They're still not going to work if there's no wind. And if you think your economy can be subject to the vagaries of weather and wind and, whether you have enough sun in the winter, which of course is not the case in northern parts of this country, you're delusional. And I think it's pretty clear that we have to be able to call these folks out, because after billions of dollars, not just in Canada, but in Europe, billions of dollars of investments, billions of dollars of walking away and shutting down nuclear plants, shutting down natural gas, turning your back on your ability to frack your own and provide your own energy. You have to really ask the question, now that these things have failed, now that Germany is opening up coal plants, now that Britain is going back to opening up the North Sea for natural gas, now that Italy is going to Libya's doorstep and asking for more oil, if this has been an abject failure, and it's very clear that they are walking away from net zero in Europe as we speak. You only have to look at another dimension of the protests. That's what farmers are doing in most of the European nations across a significant swath. If we don't recognize what's happened in Europe and we continue to ignore at our peril that wind and factors such as extreme weather make renewables unreliable, then I think we are definitely courting disaster. And it's irresponsible for politicians to go out there and say we can do that and replace hydrocarbons. The fact is, most of these renewables are complementary. They complement the existing menu of energies you have. They're not there to substitute or replace. Nothing short of that will, I think, convince people. But the law of thermodynamics, and as you said before, physics must apply here. And it's the great corrector in all this, Cory. We need to see our legislators and those who are making decisions on behalf of the country to get with the program and realize these mandates, EV mandates, clean energy regulations, carbon taxes, what's the other one? The EV availability standard. All of these things are, wonderful utopic ideas, but when subject to reality, the harsh reality of the climate in which we live in, they're not ready, and they're fundamentally dangerous to our existence in a very cold and very prohibitive country.
Yeah, well, we've got an ideologically driven government. I mean, they just won't seem to face reality. And when it comes to some of the things in trying to force people to convert away from conventional energy sources, I see on Blacklock's Reporter today, and they're fantastic. Of course, they broke with we saw the carbon tax exemption that the Liberals carved out for the Maritimes because they realized they were dropping in support over there. But they said, this is because we're going to switch everybody to heat pumps, though. We just need to move them over. And they brought in this incentive of a grant of up to $15,000 to move to a heat pump. But the numbers came out, and this has been almost a year since they brought in those grants. There have been 80 oil furnaces replaced. 80. I mean, it's absurd, but they won't back off.
No, they won't back off because it is not something they really care about, because no one's holding their feet to the fire as far as finances and scrutiny. And you're looking at, Cape Breton, buried in 100 centimeters of snow. Many of those heat pumps do not work in that kind of circumstance. I'm not going to dump on people with heat pumps, especially if they're, they got them for a reason because they thought it was free or the government's out there. But it's irresponsible, to say the least, to assume that you can put those heat pumps in and have a great life. The reality is that, don't take my word for it, no insurance company in this country is going to give you coverage if you only have a heat pump as a means of keeping your home warm. You have to have an alternative source. Rather than worrying about the alternative, rather than trying to be cute and trendy, maybe we stick with what works, continue to improve that. We've done so in the case of heating. We've done so in the case of automotive efficiencies. I mean, the internal combustion engine mated with hybrid, mated with, taking away real pollution, as we did 50 years ago with the use of catalysts on vehicles, catalytic converters. These are technologies that are game changers, but they will continue to allow us to recognize that fossil fuels are going to be here for a very long time, well past our existence for all of us who are here today and born as of this day forward.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the Hyundai I drive today, I mean, the mileage it gets compared to the old Cutlass I used to drive around at the end of the 80s. I mean, you can't even compare the two of them anymore, but it still needs gasoline. I'm not getting around that. It's the most efficient means for me. Kind of bringing things back to a little more. I mean, something you've been helpful with too, and a lot of you did in the past, though, in the short game. I mean, we've had very volatile energy prices in Calgary for whatever reason. I guess just last night, gasoline prices went up 12 cents a liter. It pays for people to shop around, though, and watch for these things. I mean, if you saw that coming, perhaps you could have filled the car up yesterday before this hit. What are the reasons for these spikes going on?
Well, look, I tweeted that on Friday. I said, folks, get ready. It's going to go up 10 cents a liter plus, more or less, because I can't determine how much a gas retailer is going to charge as far as their margin is concerned. But I warned people. I also put it up on gaswizard.ca, the site I operate. And no takers. Certainly none of the mainstream media took interest in it until it actually happened, at which point I got one, and you're the second media that's actually called me on it. I suspect that they probably don't want to hear the fact is that we're paying a lot more than we ought to, because the federal government has destroyed in many respects, scuppered the value of the Canadian dollar. That's adding 20 cents to a liter of gasoline. Of course, the carbon tax at 14.31 cents a liter. So between the two of them, that's an extra 35 cents a liter. I don't think a lot of people would be complaining if we're paying $1 a liter, but the reason is simple. One of the refineries, the biggest one in the U.S. Midwest, the BP Whitting plant in Indiana, went down with a power failure. There's a irony. They didn't have backup. So they relied on the grid electricity. It went down, caused some damage, and that caused a short temporary supply problem, if you will. On the gasoline side, we're still going to see another 2-cent wholesale price increase come tomorrow. Diesel, we're still not out of the woods yet. That jumped 5 cents a liter, which you'll see at most gas stations, eventually passed on, whether you're in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, or BC's interior.
Well, there you go. So, I mean, there's that good sense. Just to let all you viewers and listeners remember, you see, Dan told you so. So keep an eye on him. I mean, you can't predict everything. You can't stop everything. But sometimes you can see that coming down the pipe, and maybe you can kind of stock up a little and save a few bucks, because budgets are tight right now for most people. I mean, these are not the best of times. And that was something frustrating when I crossed the border into the States as well. I mean, I was driving through Arizona that, has next to nothing for oil and gas resources. Yet even with the bad Canadian dollar, when I would do the conversion, I was still paying a good 20 to 30 cents a liter less for fuel there than I do in Alberta, when I can see an oil pump every time I look to the left or the right.
Yeah, look, a couple of things to keep in mind, and that's the big one. Because as a country, we've accepted the blocking of pipelines as policies and frustrating our resources from getting to the market. No one wants to buy a Canadian dollar. It's nothing to trade with. We're not an interesting company. Else, of course, we're talking about housing. And we know that there's a lot of questions now emerging as to how the housing bubble occurred. But beyond that, the real danger in Canada is the fact that we don't have a lot of interest in what we have, and therefore our currency takes a beating. 135 pennies to buy a US dollar. Cory, I don't want to just talk about gasoline. Let's talk about every commodity that we use in this country is priced in US dollars, whether it's made here or not. So when people go around scratching their head saying, food prices are up, or the cost of housing and materials up, well, there's a good reason for that. It's because by blocking pipelines and making Canada an uninteresting place to invest, in particular, you have a weak Canadian dollar. Then, of course, you have a carbon tax on top of that. And you have other taxes, federal and provincial, but that makes up the main difference between ourselves and the United States. And very frustrating. And to talk about it, my previous job working a few years in the United States with Gas Buddy, I saw the Americans building out their pipelines, pushing their energy sector under the previous administration, while Canada sat back and allowed a group of international fanatics to basically hogtie our resources. And as a result, you and I and everybody who's complaining about inflation today have really no one to blame but those who thought it was cool and acceptable. There is a cost for these things, and if people don't want to smarten up, well, they're going to wind up with having to make some choices about whether it's going to be able to eat or heat, or be able to afford your mortgage, much less your rent.
Well, and I mean, it's going to feel like forever, but eventually, somehow, Justin Trudeau and his henchman Guilbeault will be replaced. Either it'll be a new liberal leader in power, or a new government with a new party in power. What will that new administration have to do to try and shore up this trend of just high expenses, even though we're a high resource producer?
Well, we have to stop spending in certain areas. I mean, gifting and grifting all of these climate organizations that get 30, 50 million bucks. The Climate Institute, the Canadian Climate Institute, 30 million, got 20 million a few years ago. They don't raise a lot of money. Their work is to advocate their stuff, which is basically go around to governments, tell them how to give them more money, print more money, and give us more money so that we can go and advocate even more damage to the Canadian economy without an iota of change to the so-called climate. We have to look at the reality that net zero and all of its outshoots, its policies, is likely to lead to significant deterioration in our economic outlook. If we don't address that, and I'm not talking about delaying EV mandates and delaying carbon taxes and delaying the clean fuel standard and delaying a cap on only oil and gas, which we know is discriminatory, and a cap on production. We need to look at net zero, line it up on the 30-yard line, and punt it right through the end zone. Because if we don't do it, then Canadians are going to have to make a decision about the quality of life that they want. If anybody believes for a moment that we can do without oil and gas physically and hydrocarbons, good luck with that. There isn't a single thing that we use or consume that doesn't have a component of that within it. And if we think we can do without 20 to 30 billion bucks in revenues for the federal, provincial, and municipal governments, yes, the municipal governments cash in on that as well, you're dreaming Technicolor. And the last thing people like that should be is in politics. They shouldn't be in the House of Commons. We need reality back into politics. And I'm hoping that at least one leader seems to be showing promise in that area. I still have to prod him, but I think Pierre Poilievre will make an excellent prime minister. But I can tell you, to undo the damage that's been done by the coterie of fanatics who've been in there for a long time, won't happen overnight.
No, it is going to take some time. Well, all we can do is keep pushing and studying and trying to inform people and hope we can turn that tide. And that's what you've been doing a lot of. So before I let you go, where can people find what you've been doing, Dan, and what you put out there?
Yeah, the work that I'm doing can always be found at affordableenergy.ca. That's really the best place to sign up if you can, and I appreciate you asking that. As for gas price predictions, Gas Price Wizard. And of course, if you have some opinions, I don't mind sharing them with you on X, and we may agree or disagree, as long as, of course, you're prepared to tell me who you are and you're not a troll. But I'll give you the benefit of the doubt. But for those out there who want to get in a bit of a battle, no problem. I'll do it up to a point.
Excellent. Well, I appreciate the work you do, Dan, and I appreciate you coming on to talk to us again. Keep up the good work, and I hope we get to talk again soon.
My pleasure. Looking forward to that, Cory. Take care.
You can become a Western Standard member for just $10 a month or $99 a year for unlimited access.